Everybody, at this time I'd like to call our workshop to order and let the record show all 7 board members are still here. Our first item, we had one item withdrawn. The diversity workshop has been withdrawn. So our first item is budget update. Dr. Vosa.
Thank you. I was joking with Mr. Burke earlier that he could take last year's budget out and dust it off because it looks like our friends in Tallahassee are pulling the same sort of shenanigans that we saw last year. I wish it wasn't a joke. It was actually reality. But I want to thank Mr. Burke and Heather Knust who've done a fantastic job keeping an eye on what's happening in Tallahassee, and they wanted to give you a little bit of an update. Mr. Burke?
Yes, thank you. This is our special Valentine's Day edition, but I have to warn you, there's not a lot of love in it for us here. But true happiness comes from our relationships. It's not about money, and we'll be okay. I want to just, most of the news is bad. We've got a lot of legislation that could possibly hurt our finances for next year. We're going to focus on the money type issues, and then Ms. Knust is going to go into great detail about the House and Senate budget proposals. First, I want to talk about House Bill 495. This is the one we've been warning you about for a while on the district cost differential. It's moving forward along with a companion bill on the Senate side, 824. What this bill would require is that by July of 2018, the Florida Department of Education would have to do an RFP to bring in a third-party outside consultant to study the Florida Price Level Index and the DCD. And then they would have to have their recommendations done by January of 19 so that the legislature during the 19 regular session could then possibly take action to alter that formula. Our concern is currently Palm Beach ranks as the highest cost district in the state. We get over a 4% positive adjustment that generates about $48 million a year. So when they talk about studying it or possibly changing it, I get very nervous that we could only stand to lose money. You've got Dade County Schools is in support of this bill. They get about a 2% adjustment, so I guess they feel like they should be closer to our numbers. But then you've got over 50 districts that actually get less money through this adjustment and would like to see it eliminated altogether. So that's a big concern. The potential fiscal impact, though, would be FY20 by the time this plays out. Then we've got House Bill 829 that just makes it easier for people to qualify for McKay scholarships or vouchers. House Bill 1299 would be pretty much catastrophic for our transportation department. It would lower the threshold. Right now you have to be at least 2 miles from school before you're eligible for free bus transportation. This would lower it to 1.5 miles, which actually picks up thousands and thousands of more bus riders, which needs more buses, more drivers, more mechanics, more space to park the buses, etc. So we're watching that pretty closely. Senate Bill 1704 is our FRS rates. It's very similar to what happened last year. We got about a 0.4% increase. That's about, but our payroll is $1 billion, so that 0.4% costs us about $4 million out of whatever money we get in for next year. And then House Bill 7001 would require that any increase in fees or taxes would have to be approved by both a 2/3 vote of the House and Senate. That's a very high bar. That would mean, in all likelihood, that our required local effort, where we've seen it kind of frozen for 2 years already and probably heading into our 3rd year, it may never go up again if this bill is passed. That's just a very high bar to get 2/3 approval out of both those groups. So concerned about that. House Bill 7055, this is the one, it's a very large train bill, the omnibus bill, very similar to what the House did with the Senate bill, or House Bill 7069 last year. There was an excellent editorial in our Palm Beach Post on Sunday that really went through it. But what the House has attempted to do here under the leadership of Speaker Corcoran is that to tie the education budget to House Bill 7055 that has a whole litany of legislation in it, and take it kind of a take it or leave it approach. So everyone now is watching the Senate very closely to see how they'll deal with that. The Senate, I'm told by Mr. Watt, they do feel like they kind of got burned a little bit last year with House Bill 7069, so hopefully they'll start pulling that apart and breaking up some of those issues. There's one piece in there, though, about the capital outlay, and as you know, we are suing the state over House Bill 7069. This provision would change the capital outlay and have the state give charter schools more PICO funds, basically, for FY19, and it could potentially eliminate the need for our district to provide our local money to the charters for at least 1 year. But the long-term implications are a little dicier. We're concerned. It also starts getting into equalizing capital funding across the state, which has not happened in the past. So we have some reservations. Even though it sounds like maybe a short-term win, the long-term implications could be bad for our district. Also, we have the, we were one of the first districts that took advantage of the principal autonomy pilot. It was originally open to 7 counties. I think about 5 actually applied and qualified. This bill would expand that to the whole state, so we're not sure if that could affect. We were in the line to get some funding for the next couple of years. That could be jeopardized. It's got the widely publicized Hope Scholarship Program, about $40 million towards students. If they feel like they've been bullied, they can potentially get a voucher to either go to another public school or to go to a private school. There's a piece about board member salaries that would align them with the beginning teacher salary or the state formula, whichever's less. And then there's a piece even about board travel, that you'd have to have board approval in advance of any travel, which we think is kind of ludicrous in that. So if an example, if a board member decided they needed to go to Tallahassee maybe to defend us against some of this legislation, they might have to wait until we get a board meeting scheduled so we could approve your trip. So anyway, transparency, the legislature's big on accountability. They're big on adding more reporting, more cost accounting, all that. Our team can do that. It's just more effort, more transparency, but no more money. But there's a lot of stuff that would be, some of it a hardship. It's actually the smaller districts that probably really struggle with this. Then at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Knust. What's really kind of unique about this year is we had the governor recommend a 2.74% increase. And we said at our last workshop that would be like the best case scenario. And at that point, I was hopeful that the Senate would be the kind of the good guys and follow the governor's lead and have a budget proposal that kind of mirrored the governor. That has not played out at all. And we have a House budget that's very similar to last year, but then the Senate has gotten very creative on how they've added some categoricals, and it's actually had a detrimental effect where their budget proposal would be the least favorable at this point. So with that, I'm going to have Ms. Knust kind of explain the details.
Okay, so looking at the current proposals, we can see that the governor is the highest at 2.6%. The Senate appears like they're the next highest at 1.5% or $110 per student, and the House is at $100 per student, which is the same that we had this year. But the way that the Senate did it is that they added what they called 4 new categoricals. The problem is 2 of those categoricals are not new. They're actually being funded by the state as a state grant outside of the FEFP program. And they're the Best and Brightest program and the Schools of Hope. So what the Senate version did is they eliminated the Best and Brightest program, eliminated Schools of Hope. They cut the programs, then added them into the FEFP calculation, and then called that an increase. So we're going to walk through and show you, in order to do an actual true comparison, we either have to back out the teacher salary allocation and the Hope supplemental allocation so that we can then compare it to the third calculation in the House proposal, or we have to add back in the Best and Brightest and the Schools of Hope into the third calculation in the House to really see truly what is that increase or decrease. So we're going to start by looking at if we had backed out the teacher salary increase and Hope supplemental allocation, the Senate increase of 1.5% actually turns into a 0.2% increase, or only $15 per student. And if we look at it by adding back in what we're already getting and what's being funded through the state grant, through the Best and Brightest and the Schools of Hope program, you can see that 1.5% increase turns into a negative 0.3% decrease, or a decrease of $23 per student. And that's because what I said, that in addition to them eliminating and shifting those programs, they're also pulling out $100 million out of the Best and Brightest and the Schools of Hope. So what else is in the proposal? So those additional categoricals, there's also a funding compression allocation of $56 million, and that's something that Palm Beach is not eligible for, but they wanted to add in an allocation for those districts where their average student funding or their per student funding is less than the average state per student funding in the previous year. There's a mental health assistance allocation. There's $40 million allocated to support mental health services to students. Our allocation would be $2.6 million out of that. They're also proposing an increase to the teacher classroom supply allocation from $250 per teacher to $350 per teacher. And although that is an increase, and it is a direct pass-through to the teacher, and not something that we would be able to count as part of our general fund. So we talked about also the elimination of the Schools of Hope, and what they would be creating in place of that is a Hope Supplemental Services allocation, which is $88 million. It eliminates the restriction or the cap of 25 schools, traditional public schools, and it would be allocating funds for all double D and single F schools. And so I want to walk you through what is the specific impact to Palm Beach County. And there are a lot of numbers on these next two slides. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to highlight a few. I wanted to start with the unweighted FTE, which is in the first row. You can see that our projected increase from the state is 2,900 students. That is higher than what we've projected internally. We think we're going to be closer to 2,500 students. With 1,500 being in district schools and 1,000 being in charter schools. I also wanted to highlight the next row, which is the weighted FTE. The weighted FTE is calculated based on different cost factors, weighted factors that the state applies to different student populations. And they like to change these cost factors each year, and they lowered the weight of ELL students. And by doing that, we're losing out on $2 million just based on them changing the weight and lowering the weight on the ELL students. I also wanted to highlight the BSA, which is row 5. The BSA is where we have the most flexibility in spending in the district. And you can see with the Senate allocation or the Senate proposal, they're actually proposing to reduce the BSA by $45 per student, while the House is increasing. And so on this slide, I just wanted to highlight, where I said that the Senate increase was 1.5%. You can see for Palm Beach, that's actually a 1.21% increase, and that's because we're not eligible for some of those new allocations. But that's also including the teacher salary allocation as well as the Hope supplemental allocation, which are already receiving, so that really truly isn't an increase. So after we back out the increase in charter schools and the additional revenue that we're going to have to pass through to them, the net increase for the district is going to be about $35 million. But there's significant differences when you look at the two proposals. So after we back out the increase in the FRS, adjusting for the growth in students and the additional staff that we'll have to allocate, and especially in the Senate proposal, backing out those categorical allocations that we're already receiving, you can see that we end up with a deficit with the Senate proposal of $5 million. And that's not setting aside anything for a salary reserve other than the teacher salary allocation of $13 million, which is the new leaner version of the Best and Brightest program, which is only the $1,200 bonus and the $800 bonus. It's not a it wouldn't be a bonus, it would be actually included with their salary. And so that's, just to be able to highlight, by having the Best and Brightest as a separate state-funded grant program, looking at the House proposal, you can see even though we're only able to set aside an amount of $13 million, which is equal to the increase in projected funding, that is potentially a total of $30 million that we would be able to, that would be going to employees if you add in that additional state grant fund through the Best and Brightest program. And we are early in the year, so there are a lot of variables that we're still watching. We have to see what is our actual enrollment, truly going to be. We're still going through the legislative process. Are there going to be any unfunded mandates? And also watching the federal budget process as well. Since we're looking at another year with limited funding, we have to make sure that we realign and redirect our existing resources to make sure that we're investing them in areas that align with our strategic plan. So based on our work with ERS, we know that one of the areas that they highlighted was especially with our ESC and our ELL populations. So that's going to be our focus in FY19. We're reviewing any changes to the budget as well as the board priorities with the Budget Advisory Committee. Our next meeting is this Friday, the 16th at 11 a.m. And we're working through the department budgets right now, and we're going to do a line item budget review with the superintendent and executive leadership the end of March and beginning of April. We're on track to release school budgets February 23rd. We're really trying to get them out sooner if possible. We're working on implementing some pilot programs for the ESC and the ELL students. We don't want to roll out anything district-wide without testing it first with a smaller population of schools. And you can see we're about halfway through the budget development process with tentative adoption on August 1st, and final adoption is on September 5th.
All right, so just to recap a little bit and then to look forward. So the House budget right now is actually, it's kind of sad to say, that's our best scenario at about 1.37%. Last year, we finished right about there. At the state level, it was $100 per student after the governor called him back and kind of made him do a special session to get to that $100 per kid. We had a few things helping us last year where the DCD had spiked up. So when we looked at Palm Beach numbers, we were a little over 2%. And then we worked really hard to get to about a 3% raise on average for all of our employees. Things are not looking as good for the next year. With this, if the House budget's the best thing at 1.37, it's going to be much harder to get to where we've been in the past if things don't change. And then there's some things, if you look out a year or two beyond that I'm a little bit concerned with, or that we just need to be mindful of. FY20 is it's time for us to renew our operating millage levy. We passed, you may recall, we continued a quarter mill that the board had the authority for a couple of years. And then the state said, if you want to keep this millage authority, you have to go to the voters. And in 2010, we did that. We passed a quarter mill, and we tied our art, music, and PE and choice teachers to that to kind of save those programs during the recession when other districts were forced to cut them. In 2014, we renewed the quarter mill, and it was supported. We had a 79% approval at the polls. So that 2014 approval took us all the way through. It runs your 4 years of authority. Will expire in FY19. So the timing on that is to get that quarter mill either renewed, or if we want to consider maybe increasing it, the board has up to a full mill they can ask for. We need to be on the ballot November 18, this upcoming November. So we'll be bringing some recommendations at some point to the board with ballot language and all that good stuff. You may recall, our first step is to get the board to approve the referendum, our ballot language, and we have a proceeding where we then go to the county commission, and their role is strictly ministerial, where they're supposed to just kind of bless our language, and then we get it to the supervisor of election. So that's going to be playing out in the spring, and that's ahead of us. We did, through our last round of bargaining with CTA, we recognized we had an issue with teacher salary compression in our salary schedule, and with the money we had at the bargaining table, we really couldn't do anything to remedy it in a meaningful way. So we agreed to continue to study that issue. Those meetings are underway. One thing we have looked at is if there was an appetite for it, we could potentially increase that millage levy and generate more money for teacher salaries and really make a difference in that area. But that's something that's just we have to continue to work at and see where the board stands on that later. We're looking ahead at our textbook adoptions. We have a major literacy adoption scheduled for FY21. And at this point, we're almost $8 million. We feel we're going to be short. We get a state categorical for textbooks, but it looks like it's not going to be enough to cover that. So Ms. Knust has already started planning on how we might prepare ourselves for that textbook adoption. So anyway, it's going to be exciting times on the budget front. And with FY20, I'm a little concerned because of, we need to pass our referendum. We need to hold on to our DCD. And then we also have to keep an eye on the federal government and the budget. The president's budget proposal would eliminate Title II and 21st Century Learning Grants. Title II represents about $8 million for our district. The 21st Century provides about $4 million in after-school care programs. And that could also be an FY20 timing impact if that holds up. So, we've enjoyed very modest increases from the state, and when you look forward to a few things, there's some big variables we need to consider, and then do everything we can to hang on to our local millage levy. And I believe that kind of wraps it up. We were happy to take any questions.
All right, Mrs. Brill, Mr. Barbieri, Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank
And
you.
Mrs. Brill, before, just one quick issue. When you talked about 7055, I understand the Senate has not heard that bill, and it was not even listed as a conforming bill in the budget. So can you please keep us informed on what's happening with 7055, because there is a chance that some of those issues we can affect with some advocacy
Yes, sir.
stuff. Mrs. Brill.
Thank you. And November 2018 is around the corner. I mean, if you blink your eyes, we're going to be there. And it worries me to think that we're going to lose that source of revenue. And I think my question is, are we doing any polling to see where the public stands on that right now? And are we, because we need to start socializing that with the community early on. And especially you've got some people that are going to be out, campaigning, going to events. I mean, we need to start talking about it. We're into February already.
Well, I think we've always assumed that at a minimum we would try to continue what we have in place. And then there's been some discussion about looking at alternatives if there was an appetite to go for additional millage authority.
Well, just as a follow-up, you know what the saying is about when we assume. So I think we can't assume anything. I think we really need to get moving on it.
So we've had several meetings with a joint committee with the union about compensation, how we might go about that. I think you heard the president of the CTA today, Justin Katz, talk about that. We're also in discussion with the local person who does polling and trying to determine the best possible time to do so.
Right, Mr. Barbieri and then Ms. Whitfield.
Dr. Vosa, before we get farther into the budget plan or the budget adoption, I'd like you to call a special meeting or a closed workshop on the security. With we every day we get a text that there's a gun on a campus. Now we just had a shooting at Stoneman Douglas with 20 to 50 kids shot. So, I want to talk about security. There's some issues. We need to make sure there's money in the budget to take care of. The police department is underhanded. We need more police officers. They need more equipment. I want to talk about that before we allocate money everywhere else. We need to get security under control. So can we get a workshop scheduled?
We will certainly do so. Part of the discussion around the quarter mil or half mil or three-quarter, et cetera, was to provide we're thinking about that. That's the board's ultimate decision. We don't have a police officer at every single school every day. They rotate through. Every middle and high school in the district, you've made a commitment to do so. But now may be the time to go to the community and say, it's time to have a police officer, armed police officer at every school, including elementary. So I will certainly put that together and make sure that Chief Leon and the team can give you a closed session update.
Thank you. Mrs. Whitfield.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if you could think and give us a general idea. I'm just curious. When we are looking at this budget, and they're fairly wildly different from the House to the Senate to the governor. In your experience, have you seen how those generally play out? I was thinking that the Senate seems to have a little bit more pull on that. In the past, have we seen them go towards that budget more, or is there any way we can tell which direction they're going to be heading?
If I had to bet, I think we're going to land closer to the House budget proposal.
Okay.
It's a more traditional, the way they've handled the FEFP, and just they've seemed to be calling the shots the last couple of years. The Senate kind of threw a monkey wrench into things by the way they took the best and brightest and then they pulled it in to try to take credit for it as a funding increase. They added some categoricals. Some of them, the mental health thing, that would be great. We've been talking about that. But they truly didn't really put any more money on the table. So I'm a little disappointed that the Senate didn't, like I said, come out closer to like a 3% proposal that would have benefited us. So if I had to guess right now, I'd say the odds of the House prevailing would be better, on the budget anyway. The whole issue with House Bill 7055, the Senate, does seem to be pushing back. I think we'll see separate, maybe a train bill on the Senate side where different pieces of 7055 could get hitched on. And Mr. Watts helping us out up in Tallahassee now, trying to sort through all that.
So the other thing I was curious about is, as we're looking at our budget, I think it's important for us to consider, if we do end up with more of a Senate budget, where we would cut to cover those expenses, because obviously we can't keep going. I'm very concerned about the teachers in this situation, and I think that's something we have to be thinking about. Obviously, security and Mr. Barbieri's comments are very timely and mean a lot to me. But as we're thinking about the teachers coming forward next year wanting a raise again, and we may be dealing with cutbacks from the state, I'm curious if there are any areas that we could cut back in, so that we could continue to see some growth here. It is just very difficult to live here, so I have fear that we won't be able to pass on anything to teachers next year. So I'm just curious if you see any space that we would be able to cut back. Thank you.
It's never easy because we kind of lived through a series of cutbacks with the recession. But we will, we're forced to develop a balanced budget each year, so we will develop some alternatives. With the class size amendment, you really are tied. We really can't get by with fewer teachers, so then it puts pressure on all other parts of the budget. One thing with the Senate budget, the one positive about what they've done to the best and brightest is the teachers would no longer get the one-time bonus. It would be a recurring either $1,200 or $800 that would count towards FRS and all that. But it wouldn't be certainly comparable to what they had this year. We settled for 3.2% on top of the best and brightest. This year, our teachers brought in over $17 million in best and brightest money. We had over 700 teachers qualify for the $6,000 best and brightest, the top bonus there based on their SAT scores, and thousands get the effective and highly effective, which will be cutting those checks on March 9th. So this was a pretty good year. Unfortunately, and I feel like it's a broken record. Every year we come in here and say it's all doom and gloom, but there is a problem in this state where the state economy is growing again, growing by approximately 4% a year, but yet on the education front, we are seeing minimal increases and just more accountability and more loss of local control. And our state really needs to kind of wake up and pay attention to what's going on, because I've been doing this 28 years, and it does get a little depressing to look ahead when you see what we continue to, it's like an assault every day in Tallahassee. There's a bill that just got filed or was bouncing around yesterday that if we wanted to go past our sales tax referendum like we did for the capital budget now, we would potentially have to hire an outside CPA to come in and do a full performance audit to make sure, to validate the need for the sales tax. And this is the same legislature that cut our capital funding by 25%, cost us over $900 million. So there's just a disconnect between what the needs are on a day-to-day basis in the classroom and the legislation that's getting kicked around.
Mr. Burke, just to add to that, and I want to go on the record as an administration, the staff, that we recently had to send a letter to the state because we refused to pay Eagle Arts Academy, which is a charter school. And Mr. Burke, you received, you sent a letter to them letting them know that we weren't going to be paying. But can you tell the board what happened in terms of the state's reaction? Because this is a school that's been in a downward spiral financially, according to the way we've been reviewing it. And we felt that it was prudent to the taxpayers that we would not send additional money to a school that appears in every fashion to be failing. Can you share with what the state responded to
real
us?
quick, we've kind of had this ongoing debate with how much control do we really have over charter school finances. So with the House Bill 7069, it requires us to share the capital money. There's some eligibility criteria, right? And the whole, I guess, crux of it is that eligibility criteria says, okay, look at what the charter schools audit looked like last year, and a few other factors. But mainly what our point was, Eagle Arts Academy, we know this year, and we were required to pay the money by February 1st. We know based on our experience this year that their financial condition is deteriorating, that we've asked them to comply with the corrective action plan that we have yet to get satisfied. So we had some reservations about turning over $217,000, knowing what we know now. We explained that to the state and said, we were upfront about it. We sent a letter and said, look, we're going to pay, we had to pay out $9 million to a number of charter schools. We told the state, we're withholding this one payment because of our concerns about their financial condition. The state sent us back a letter and said, no, we said they were eligible. You're kind of mandated to pay them. And there's other remedies to you, basically, if you feel like the school needs to be shut down or whatever, but you need to pay them. So that's where we struggle with it when we see potential problems brewing. Ms. Rico's maybe getting ready to put a gag order on me. I don't know.
Ms. Rico, please
Thank
jump
you.
into that one too.
Not to gag at all, because Mr. Burke and Ms. Knus have been really struggling, as we all have, with the mandate of 7069 and other accountability issues of the charter schools' financial issues over the years. But particularly with 7069 and the capital millage requirement, there is no discretionary opportunity, and we used the best judgment in the stewardship of the public funds to take a position that those funds being issued in the amount of around $200,000 or more to a charter school whose financial condition is known to be in disarray and in financial distress would be imprudent. And therefore, a letter was sent to DOE stating that those funds would not be paid unless further directed by DOE, and we were essentially mandated to make that payment because the flaw and the unconstitutional piece of that 7069, which is what we're challenging, does not allow for the appropriate discretion of the district's financial executives. And so this imprudent disbursement of funds is basically without our discretion and without any opportunity to hold those back in the face of practicality that would say otherwise.
Mr. Barbieri.
Yeah, I know that we have Palm Beach Post and Sun Sentinel sitting back there, so I would hope that Andrew and Lois, you would do a story on this, because it's really ridiculous that we're paying money out to a school that probably would be out of business by summer. And the judge in the case where we tried to get the injunction said that we have a recourse because we can always get the money back from the school, but a school that goes out of business won't have any money for us to get back. So I hope you will both dig into this story, publicize it for the taxpayers, and show them that, our constitutional authority was taken away by the state board, and that we had no discretion to withhold money that we know is going to go down, go down the sewer, because we have no way to get the money back. So I hope you will do a story to let the taxpayers know what's going on, because it's ridiculous what Tallahassee is doing to the school board's authority to oversee the public school system. They're quick to point out that charter schools are public schools, but yet we have no authority over the public school system, which the Constitution says we does, that we do to withhold money when we know the school is going out of business. So if you would please try and publicize that, it would help us get our cause heard in other areas of the state. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Burke, to add to that, it might be interesting to also do a look at what the state did to some other counties related to their withholding of some of those $69 and the threats that the state put forth that they were going to withhold their FEFP money completely because of that. So I think that's something the public needs to be aware of. Mr. Burke, a quick question. It's one of the items on one of your slides is change weight of consult students, those students not receiving direct service. What's the practical implication on that? Is this just the number of teachers we'd hired who would be hired, or what does that do to a school?
We're going to pilot some changes. You may recall the work we did with ERS. They came in and they spent 10 months with us, and they said that we had a lot of positive findings, and then they pointed out a few areas they thought we could work on. Our ESC and ELL allocation is one of those areas, and Ms. Knust has been working with the ESC department and some of our principals. Heather, you want to just kind of get the details there?
Yeah, so specifically with the change in the consult students, or the way our allocation formula works right now, is all students are treated the same and weighted the same regardless of the actual services that they're receiving. And so consult students don't receive direct student contact from the teacher. And so the recommendation that we had from ERS was that those really should be at a higher ratio than those students that are receiving direct service, that they should be weighted separately. And so that's all it's doing, is it's just changing that ratio for those students.
Just the bottom line, Chairman Shaw, is you're not going to see a reduction in teachers. You're going to see maybe a shift of teachers, more like maybe a fewer in the high schools and more in the elementary, because we're kind of putting the resource more into the direct service.
All right. Any other questions, Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. To follow up on that, I was going to request that we get more information in writing about this change of the ESC and ELL allocations, and where the pilots will take place, and what the academic people say about it, not just the budget people, if you will.
Okay.
So the other thing, I have to say that we have to address the social emotional behavioral needs of students. We have to. So Mr. Barbieri brings up the safety issues, and having more police officers will assist with concerns about threats coming from the outside. But what I hear, and actually in a conversation with a teacher yesterday, was about basically the threats on the inside. And we talk about bullying and so forth in schools that are viewed to not be safe, and therefore people don't want to send their children to those schools. So we have to address the social-emotional issues, and so I hope to see in this budget, Dr. Vosa, even though you're leaving.
It's our budget.
Okay. An expansion of the MTSS, or social-emotional behavioral coaches, and we also need to standardize the expectations for their roles so that the needs of students are being met in each school, and that it's not based upon the desires of the principal to alter that. They need to be the leaders on the restorative justice practices, and they need to make sure our school-based teams and our cooperative agreements work to benefit students, and it's not other duties as assigned. And I really just don't think that we're going to reach our potential until we address those social emotional needs. So I want to see that reflected in the budget. I also hope that we will have fewer schools on the low 300 list, but that we find a way not to just withdraw those additional supports. Right, I get the budget challenge, but we can't keep doing what Dr. Christensen called the whack-a-mole. And I want, when we come forward, I'm sure as a matter of routine, we're going to come forward with this literacy textbook adoption, but I'm going to need somebody to explain to me why we need to buy new textbooks. I mean, I need an academic person to tell me that. I mean, maybe the standards have changed or something, but I don't know why somebody needs to explain this to me. I get all shiny, new, and pretty and all that, but books don't teach children. Teachers do. So I need somebody to explain, if the recommendation comes forward to spend this money on textbooks, why? Thank you.
I just want to mention real quick, this Friday, your Budget Advisory Committee will be getting into more detail on the ESC changes, and also we do have a proposal on the SEL front. It's probably not as big as you'd like to see, but it's movement. So, but we'll be going into it more in depth, because we've got about 3 hours with the advisory committee. Starts at 11?
11 o'clock, yeah.
Mrs. McQuinn.
Just a quick question. Having friends who have children in the school system now, and particularly at the secondary level, so many of the teachers, and I realize there's a good process that teachers give input into textbook selection, but I'm going to tell you, many of the teachers are not using the textbooks for students. They're culling out what they need, which typically they get online. So I don't know if there's any kind of process that we have in terms of a survey, and what we're required to do, but I just notice more and more they're not actually using the books.
All right, any other questions? With that, Mr. Burke, thank you very much. Our next topic is sales tax update and